I'm Dr. Sam Lemon, and I'm an assistant professor at Newman University. Two of my ancestors were involved in World War I. The first was Caspar Miller White, and Caspar was a member of the 369th Infantry, also known as the Harlem Hellfighters. And he served in the Second Battle of the Marne, where he was wounded, seriously wounded, unfortunately, and also suffered from a gas attack. He, along with the entire regiment, as you may know, were awarded the Croix de Guerre by the French government, and he also was awarded the Conspicuous Service Medal. Caspar was living in New York City at the time. His father actually had a very interesting background, Dr. Abraham White. He was basically kind of rescued from the South, from Alabama, I believe it was. His parents had been murdered by the KKK. A wealthy white couple had been traveling in the South. Somewhere they met Abraham, brought him up here, helped him go to Lincoln University, and then he later enrolled in the University of Pennsylvania Medical School, and was one of the first black graduates to become a surgeon. I think he was a class of 1901. So Caspar came from really a great heritage. And when the World War I came along, decided he wanted to enlist and serve his country. But it was very difficult for black soldiers. It's always been very difficult for black soldiers. I mean, back starting with the Civil War and moving forward. But one of the great things was that the French government and the French army absolutely loved the American soldiers, particularly this 369th Infantry. They were legendary. As you know, the Germans kind of gave them that moniker, the Harlem Hellfighters, or the Black Rattlers, and they were ferocious. They almost never lost any territory. They actually didn't lose any of their soldiers, although on two occasions some of their soldiers were captured, but they were later reclaimed by the regiment. But they were absolutely ferocious fighters. And in addition to that, another unique thing about the 369th was their band. They had a remarkably good military band. James Reese Europe was their band leader, and U.B. Blake, who later wrote Shuffle Along and other musicals, was a part of that band as well. They toured France about 2,000 miles and performed, probably dozens, if not hundreds, of concerts in which they introduced jazz to the French people. So, it was kind of a love affair between the American soldiers and the French people. Unfortunately, that didn't translate when they came back home to America. And the freedom that they were fighting for the French people was not a freedom that they were able to win for themselves back home. So one of the major problems with black soldiers is that they were always fighting on two fronts. They were fighting whoever the enemy happened to be, in this case the Germans in World War I, but they were also fighting racism here back home. And there are some pretty tragic stories about things that happened to black soldiers still in uniform. I understand one was lynched in the South because he made the mistake of doing something he thought was going to be okay, like riding a public streetcar or something. But it's a great heritage, and it's a way for people to, especially historically oppressed people, to show their loyalty, to demonstrate their loyalty to their country, despite all these, transgressions and shortcomings. Because Caspar had been seriously wounded and suffered a gas attack, I don't think he ever really recovered when he came back. And I think he eventually, developed some problems with alcoholism, probably as a way of sort of self-medicating, maybe as a way of trying to forget some of those horrific memories. But he did not fare well. First marriage ended in divorce, got married a second time, was never really able to hold a job after that. And I think that's kind of a price of valor that we often don't account for when it comes to our soldiers and our veterans when they come back. And unfortunately, America doesn't always keep the promises that it makes to our veterans. The other ancestor who was involved in World War I was my great-grandfather, William Henry Ridley. He originally had enlisted to serve in the Spanish-American War, was about to debark onto a ship while he was in Florida when the war ended, and he was very disappointed. So some years later, when World War I came along, He pushed back his age, which was 50 at the time, and enlisted and was enrolled in the Colored Officers Training Program at Fort Des Moines in Iowa. Unfortunately, he never did see service, but he was very proud to be in the military. And the military has always been very important in my family. William Ridley was an entirely different story. Again, he was hoping to serve in the Spanish-American War, which ended unfortunately before he could get shipped over to Cuba. He had a tremendous career. He, in 1891, became the first African-American attorney in Delaware County, was admitted to the bar, and had a remarkable 54-year legal career. So Ridley was a very popular member of the legal community, a very highly respected person in the general community, and fared much better in terms of his professional and personal life, than Caspar did. Well, I think in general, genealogy is kind of an underappreciated. It's more than an art form, although certainly that kind of research is an art form. But knowing where you came from helps you figure out where you're going and who you are, because we're products of our environment, we're products of our family, and I think all too often people today are looking for heroes. They're looking for superheroes. I mean, Star Wars is a great example. But professional athletes and boxers and football players and basketball players, and everybody wants to play in the NBA and be a famous star. But that's really not a likely option for most people. And they overlook the fact that there are heroes right in our own families. And so, I've always felt a really strong connection to these people. I lived with my grandmom when I was very young for a number of years, and she had lots of old family photographs, and she taught me all the oral history of my family, and particularly in terms of her grandparents who were runaway slaves. It enabled me to jump a couple of generations and get this information, almost right from the source. So I grew up with this love of these people, and I had this endless thirst for. I wanted to know who they were and how did they think and what did they do and where did they come from, because all of those things did two things. It helped me kind of find my own identity, but it also gave me heroes and role models to look up to. And especially with my great-grandfather, William Ridley, although he passed away about 6 years before I was born, he was always kind of a father figure to me. And my own father really wasn't much a part of my life. And so, I always had, my great-grandfather's picture up on the wall, and I wanted to live my life and accomplish things in a way that he would be proud of me, because he was such a pioneer in terms of what he did. And, I think when I walk past this picture hanging on my wall, he's kind of smiling at me, and I like that. I feel connected. And I think if people today understood, it almost seems like the civil rights movement is going backwards, or that there never was a civil rights movement. And the Rosa Parks and the James Merediths and the Martin Luther Kings and the people who go back even before then, all of those contributions in which people sacrifice their lives for America are forgotten or discarded or not cared about. And so, recapturing this history is absolutely essential to show that people of color really have earned the right to call themselves Americans and be treated with equal justice under the law. And I think that's a battle worth fighting.